Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt down in the catacombs. Now, this reminds me of the great story of Margaret More when she visited her father, St. Thomas More, in the Tower of London for the last time. And from the window of his cell there in the tower, they watched these three Carthusian priors go to their execution for not going along with the oath of supremacy and so forth at the time under King Henry VIII. And More looks to his daughter and he says, "Lo, dost thou not see, Meg, that these blessed fathers be now as cheerfully going to their deaths as bridegrooms to their marriage?" It's beautiful. Now, these Christian Coptics that we just saw, they may not be cheerful, but they're clearly not terrified either. And we see in them the mark of the martyr, of the Christian martyr. And it really makes you wonder if the media failed to cover their martyrdom because they didn't know what to do with that look. They didn't know what to do with this. Men who are more or less willingly going to their deaths, confessing fidelity to Jesus Christ, rather than simply saving their skins through apostasy. But you can't help wondering, as you look at these Coptic Christians, how many Roman Catholics today would die like these men did? You know, what motivated them, really, regardless of the fact that they're Coptic Christians, what motivated them to die on that beach is what motivated all Catholic martyrs in history. Love. Love of Christ, love for the church. Now, of course, it's always easier said than done. St. Thomas More pointed at himself and said, "This is not the stuff of which martyrs are made." And I'd be the first to say that I wouldn't rush to challenge the powers of hell by saying, "Wow, look at me, I'm going to be a great martyr." So it's easier said than done. But on the other hand, if you really put this in context, they died for love, or martyrs died for the love of the church, and dying for one's mother isn't particularly heroic. In fact, it takes something of a scoundrel not to be willing to die for his mother. Am I right? And maybe this is the most pernicious aspect of the revolution in the Catholic Church since the Second Vatican Council, because with all of its babble about mission and encounter, and of course our favorite, accompaniment,
and this is the new evangelization, and to that we're all called.
The church no longer speaks the language of love for the church, love for Holy Mother Church, love for our mother, and I think we're seeing the effects of that today. It's always difficult to talk about these things without sounding like, look at me, look at me, look at me now. But I would argue that traditional Catholic, myself, speaking for myself for a moment, I'm not a traditional Catholic because I'm holier than you are, or holier than anyone else in the world. I'm a traditional Catholic because I'm in love with Holy Mother Church. And let me explain. This love is not the result of the cultivation of virtue, of heroic virtue on my part, as much as it is because I grew up in a Catholic church. The revolution was really just coming out of the closet when I was a kid. So I grew up in a Catholic church that still sought to instill that love for Holy Mother Church in the hearts of children. So it's no particular mark of honor on my part or virtue on my part. I imbibed love for the Catholic Church with my mother's milk. Mine was the last generation of Catholics that spent 12 years in Catholic school, learning first and foremost, how to love the old faith. Yeah, you know what? I remember the nuns that everybody likes to beat up on. I remember them well. I never saw one of them with a ruler unless she was drawing a straight line in class. I never got my knuckles rapped. I never saw nuns like that. I didn't even hear of nuns like that. And it's interesting that you have 25-year-olds on Saturday Night Live now talking about nuns who beat them when they were young. Where were these nuns back in the 1990s when this guy on Saturday Night Live was talking about the terrible nuns? They were all gone by then. So it's very popular to beat up on Catholic nuns. I remember them. I remember beautiful ladies in black habits showing whole generations of little kids how to love the church, how to reach beyond themselves, and to do something noble and something good. And it worked. Whole generations of young people learned to love the church. Now, in a few months, we're going to be returning to France to walk the Chartres pilgrimage. And, Rob, you walk the Chartres pilgrimage. You know what that's like. So you know what I'm talking about. We go back every year and walk this great pilgrimage, 70 miles from Paris to Chartres. And one of the main reasons that we do it is because I want to introduce young people, young Catholics, to this idea of Mother Church, to fall in love again, really, with the old faith, with the old Mass, with Holy Mother Church, the way it happened to me a long time ago. Someone took the time to do it to me, to show me how to love the church and what the church really looks like, to show us what we lost on pilgrimage 26, 27, 28 years ago, and I never got over it. So we do the same thing. And I got to tell you, to see Holy Mother in church in action is a powerful thing. Not theoretically, not in books, not just an obligatory sense on Sunday morning and a beautiful Latin Mass. No. To really get down and feel and see and smell what it's like to live in Christendom, in a microcosm of Christendom, is an amazing thing. So every year, and again, this will be our 26th year that we've walked from Paris to Chartres, I got to admit it, after a year, every year, after walking for 2 days and sleeping on the ground for 2 nights and all of the things that come along with a difficult medieval-style pilgrimage, when I see those spires of Notre Dame de Chartres on the horizon, the great Gothic stone monument, really, of what? A monument of what? A monument of Catholic love. Love for God, love for His Blessed Mother. That's what that building's all about. And when I point her out to the young pilgrims in our group, without fail, my voice falters and my eyes get mysteriously misty, filling with tears. Why? Because I'm a saint? No, because I'm a sinner. And the vision and the idea of Holy Mother Church, for the sinner especially, means all the hope and all the mercy in the world. And you can't help but to love that which has given you everything that you are, and has forgiven you, and has embraced you, and has nurtured you, and raised you up from when you were a little child that you can't even remember those days. The church was there. That's not how many times you fall that matters, my old mother used to say, but it's how many times you get back up again. And that was the old message of the church. Holy Mother Church wasn't counting your falls. She was counting how many times you got back up again. And she encouraged you to get back up again. And you loved her for it. And maybe some of you are as old as me, remember that feeling of when you were a little kid, standing outside of a confessional box on a Saturday afternoon. Your heart's racing, you're nervous, but you're eager to get in there and get the job done, right? And then the flood of relief and joy and gratitude and all of that emotion when the priest behind the screen in the little lit area there, the little room in the confessional behind the screen, he absolves you of your sins and he slides the little door closed and it's over. And you stand up and you can start again. That's what Holy Mother Church did for us when we were children. Priests lovingly leading us towards lives that would have meaning, that would matter, and that would get us someday, hopefully, to the reward of everlasting life. So they say that the old church lacked mercy. Now, we hear a lot about that. The church lacked mercy. The church of the old days lacked love, lacked compassion. It was nothing but a big book of rules. But whoever says this, whoever says that the Catholic Church never knew how to be loving and merciful, whoever says that doesn't know the first thing about the Catholic Church. Because when we were kids, the church wasn't about obligation. The church was about love and challenge, loving young people especially enough to first tell them what's right and wrong, and then to challenge them to get out there and live it, see if you can live up to it. So we tried. We were all sinners, we were all goofballs, we were all scrappers when we were kids. But we wore our scapulars as a badge of honor, not because somebody told us that we had to. We gave up meat on Friday because we wanted to, not because somebody said we had to. We heard Mass in Latin because every warrior that we'd read about, every crusader, every Catholic king, every saint, every martyr heard Mass that way, in Latin, for 1,000 years or more. And we wanted that. We envied their Catholic metal, the spittle, whatever it was, the stuff that made them Catholic, that set them apart. We knew who they were, and we wanted to be like them. It was part of our heritage to be like them. It's what Catholics did. It's why we were Catholics. We loved what they did, what they built over the bones of martyrs and from the wood of the cross. We loved the customs, the rituals, the glorious history of Christendom, the Lenten fasts, the feasting of Christmas and Easter, the unbroken marriages, the sacrifices, the family life, the great stories, the commitment, and the many payoffs of what it meant to be a Catholic. So I'm 8 years old. I'm sitting in a dark church with my mother, 8 years old on Good Friday, listening to Tenebrae, watching those candles go out one by one, reading the ancient psalms as best as I could muddle through as an 8-year-old, listening to the Gregorian chant, cutting my teeth on the Catholic thing, in other words. 3 hours with an aching backside and sore knees, nevertheless transfixed by the Catholic thing, the Catholic pageantry, the mystery, the ritual, the drama of the Catholic faith. And you think I was sitting there in that dark tenebrae out of obedience, out of duty, out of obligation to a controlling and maniacal Holy Mother Church who was making us feel guilty? It's ridiculous. You don't have any idea of what it means to be Catholic if you think that it was Catholic guilt that motivated any of that. Midnight masses on Christmas, vigil masses on Holy Saturday, fire and smoke, candles, light and darkness, Lumen Christi, ashes on Wednesday, fasting on Ember Day, candles to the throat on St. Blaise's Day, water at baptism, chrism at confirmation, holy oils at the deathbed, the processions, the pilgrimages, the ritual of being Catholic. Do you think we did any of that out of duty? Like every Catholic kid that I knew, what I'm talking about here is not some heroic thing. This is the way everybody looked at it 50 years ago, 40 years ago. So like every Catholic kid that I knew when I was a kid, every aspect of our lives, every event of any significance in our lives, the church was always there. Everything was church related. In life, in death, in happy times, and maybe especially in hard times. Even as kids. I remember sitting on a street corner when I was a little kid, like 3rd or 4th grade, over at Holy Childhood School, waiting for my mother to pick me up after school. Now, she had 9 kids, so she had a full plate. And we lived a long way from church because this was after Vatican II and everything was a mess. And so they were commuting. We were commuting every morning, 15, 20 miles to go to school, grade school. So there I am, this little 3rd grader. Sometimes she'd get a little late. Oftentimes she was a little late. And I remember many times I'd start getting a little nervous. I'm kind of by myself, kind of scared. The sun's starting to set in the winter months or whatever. And what did I do? I did what every other Catholic kid would do back in those days. Mom wasn't there yet. You step into the church. Doors are unlocked, of course, back in those days. I was no saint. It was just the normal, natural thing to do. Just sit there and chat with the Lord. No more fear, maybe no formal prayers during those visits. Just sit there with him. You see what I mean? The church was literally our mother, and we knew what she sounded like. We knew what her candles smelled like. We knew what the pictures and the statues and the sanctuaries looked like. It was home. It was real. It was powerful. Soldiers died for her. Virile men became chaplains and went to war to bring her sacraments to soldiers on a battlefield. They made movies about her. Sinatra, Bing Crosby, the biggest names you can think of are playing priests back in those days because the Catholic Church was so powerful. And the more we understood our role as children of the Catholic, of Holy Mother Church, the more she meant to us as we aged. And you see, that's the problem with the youth encounters and the World Youth Days and the net teams and everything else today. It's not malice. I'm sure the people behind these things, most of them mean well, but they treat young people like idiots who can't grasp the theological part of the Catholic Church. So now they treat them like idiots. They who need bright colors and lights and rock and roll to have an encounter with the church. That's what they're resorting to try to just get young people to stay in the church past the 8th grade. Now, Dr. Spock, he'd be thrilled with that, but kids are bored. They see through it. They're bored silly after a few years of that sort of silliness. But see, that never happened to us. We didn't need an encounter with the church. There was never a waking moment when we weren't encountering the church. We had to go somewhere and have some silly person tell us we're going to now have an encounter. We always were encountering the church. Every time we took a breath, I grew up with 8 siblings because nobody was there telling my mother and father about responsible parenthood. So we had a house full of kids. And I'm, boy, oh boy, am I ever not talking about something that was special to my family. This is the way it was all around when I grew up. There were 11 of us in this house, so small that my father had to literally knock out a wall every few years just to make room for the next kid that God sent that came along. We didn't have any money. There were 11 of us crammed into a little house with 1 bathroom. Now imagine that. 7 sisters in this family, 7 girls, and 1 bathroom. The 2 boys were voted down every single Sunday morning especially. And my father and mother lived in a little tiny bedroom with a little double bed that barely fit, and they were happily married for 50 years. Five of my sisters shared one bedroom when I was growing up. And we didn't really think of it as hard times. We were having too much fun. There were cats and dogs and fish and hamsters and chaos and nightly rosaries and baptism and forts in the yard and hordes of neighborhood kids running all over the place, most of them Catholic. I didn't even know anybody who was Protestant when I was a kid. We'd play outside all day long in the summer, all day long. No helmets, by the way, no helmets. We weren't so worried about that. They didn't even have seat belts in the cars back in those years, come to think of it. Certainly no helmets when we were riding our bicycles. Running in our neighborhoods, with dogs that were never, ever on leashes, by the way. With orders from the command, from Central Command, namely Mother, to be back in time for dinner, and that was about it. Nobody was worried about terrorists or rapists or weirdos or perverts. It didn't even enter anyone's minds. Nobody locked their doors. The car keys were always right where they belonged in the old Grand Squire station wagon, right in the ignition, night and day. That's the way it was for everyone before we progressed and grew up and became sophisticated. I remember that. The moms in our neighborhood, they were all pals. They have coffee in the morning. They stayed home with their broods. Oh my goodness, they didn't have their career. You didn't think they had a career? They had careers all right. They were doing the real hard work at that time, raising civilized generations of young people who went out and made a difference. Yes, they had careers, but they also had picnics. They had May crownings. They had food drives, paper drives, holy hours, all-night vigils, going out and doing things for poor people, making food at the food shelter for the homeless people. And life for everybody else involved with these powerful women who were doing this back before they got feminized and liberated. Life was safe. Life was genuine. It was fun. Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was challenging. But it was wonderful all at the same time. And we more or less kept our heads. We didn't need a lot of shrinks. We didn't need a lot of medication. Not a lot of suicide attempts. We didn't even hear of that back in those days. Everyone I knew came from a huge Catholic family where siblings and friends and cousins and neighborhood moms and dads took care of each other. We didn't need the state or the federal government bothering us about anything. When you think about it, that's what they did. They got rid of the family so everybody become susceptible to the nanny state. Well, we didn't need that. Didn't even think about government back in those days. We took care of our own. We kept kids safe, moral, healthy, and happy. There was no pornography. There was no school shootings. The occasional neighborhood bully was taken care of in the good old-fashioned way, if you know what I mean. Everyone knew which bathroom to use, by the way, which was nice back in the day. It never occurred to us that you might want to use another bathroom besides the one that you were supposed to use. But that's back when the world was sane, and so was the church. And by and large, you know what? Policemen led pretty darn boring lives back in those days. And in the evenings, everyone's mom would come to the door and shout, "Okay, Mary, Kathy, Joey, Mikey, Joni, Jilly, whoever, come on in. Time for the rosary." And that's how it was. And in the morning, we'd all get up and go down the hill, walk down the hill to St. John's to go to school. And again, I'm talking about the average Catholic experience in this country, certainly in the Midwest. Nothing special to our area. We'd walk down the hill, literally, to St. John's, either to go to church or to go to Mass, depending on what day it was. The same church where we were all baptized, where we'd receive sacraments. The church whose bells would ring out every noon and every evening, reminding the parish that it was Angelus time. The church that the old pastor himself had built with his own hands. Well, after he and Mr. Garsky had dynamited the first church and rocked the neighborhood with this massive explosion, announcing that the new church construction was underway. That's the way it went back then. I don't think they got any permits from the state. They just went ahead and did what needed to be done and built a church. The old pastor built that church, then he built the school, then he built a little credit union so that everyone could help everyone else in the parish build a little home eventually. He even built a fire department. And it wasn't uncommon to see old Monsignor Duran, cassock and all, riding shotgun on his little fire engine, running around town when one of the volunteer firemen hadn't heard the siren for some reason. You see what I'm saying here? This is the way it was when I was a kid. I'm not 100 years old. It wasn't that long ago. I think it can be brought back again if we would begin to appreciate what we've lost. Was it perfect? Of course it wasn't perfect. It was life. And nothing about life is perfect, not in this world. But it was a whole lot better than the insanity that we have going on right now. Now, we're not traditionalists today because we know better than everyone else. We're not traditionalists because we're holier than you are. We're traditionalists because we remember. And today, I want it back. I want to raise my kids Catholic as my father raised me Catholic. I want to save my soul. That's the reason we're here, right? I don't want an encounter. I just want to save my soul. I want the family to stay together as my family has stayed together all these years, still Catholic, united in the old faith, the old culture, the old customs, the old traditions. I want to attend Mass in Latin, not because I'm some snobby Latinist dork, but because that's the Mass of St. Thomas More. That's the Mass the Cristeros heard back in the 1920s, also not that long ago. That's the Mass the Vendéans would have heard, the Crusaders, the English martyrs, the Japanese martyrs, exactly as it's said today in the traditional form. That's the Mass of our fathers for 1,000 years or more before this Novus Ordo or New Order. Isn't it funny? We got a new world order threatening everyone that comes on the heels of a new order of the Mass? What a strange coincidence. And yet that's what it was, a new order in the church that crushed the old order almost completely. And the question is, why did we abandon all of that? What have we got today that's an improvement of what I just tried to describe for you, and which I know is the experience of many in this audience? After Vatican II, that old parish priest that I was talking about who built the church and baptized all of us and drove around on the fire engine sometimes, well, he was kicked out immediately because he didn't want to give up the Latin Mass. Latin and Gregorian in our little parish church were out, and bulldozers and felt banners were in. Kumbaya, baby. The nuns that taught us literally disappeared. They disappeared, gone, overnight. Their little convent is still standing there, which the old pastor also built, only it was bought up by some world peace organization doing their thing now out of our old convent. It was total revolution. I remember riding my bicycle through the church parking lot after the parish had blown up and kicked out the priests and kicked out the nuns, and most of the nuns just took off on their own. And I see slabs of hacked up high altar lying on the ground as curbstones. That's how vicious this was. Without sacrifice, there was no need for an altar, so we might as well take the altar and hack it up and use it for curbstones. That's exactly what they did. You know, in the film For Greater Glory about the Cristeros, there is that horrible scene when the Masonic federales enter a Catholic church. They hang the priest and they shoot up the sanctuaries, statues and tabernacles and crucifixes. It's kind of a violent thing for a Catholic to watch, this scene. And yet, I lived through that. A person my age, we lived through a time when Catholic popes, bishops, and priests destroyed their own sanctuaries in the same manner, only this time with bulldozers instead of rifles. And the question that I guess we want to ask from down here in the catacombs is why we come down here every week. The question that we really want people to seriously consider is why? Why do they do this? Who benefited from this? Remember we talked about all of Christendom for 1,000 years took a knee at the Et Incarnatus Es, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Every soul in Christendom knelt down. Somewhere back in the 1970s, they decided that was not a good idea, and they stopped doing it. And the question there, too, is why? Why? What demon decided that was okay? And in general, how can anyone argue that anything in the Catholic Church today is better than it was just 50 years ago? It's not better. It's dramatically worse. It's not even comparable. I know. I was a kid back then, but I remember. And we have to ask ourselves why. Who did this and why? Don't put it in terms of traditionalist versus neo-Catholic versus whatever. Just ask yourself as a Catholic, why? Why did this happen? Because something went very wrong. And we are, as Archbishop Lefebvre said, now we are bound, as we look at this, we're bound to pray, to redouble our prayers. We are witnessing an assault by Satan himself against the church, as has never been seen. We must pray to Our Lady, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to come to our assistance for we can have no idea what horrors tomorrow may bring. It is not possible for God to tolerate infidelity indefinitely, to tolerate these blasphemies, these sacrileges, which are committed against his glory and majesty. One need only reflect on the horror of abortion, on rampant divorce, on the ruin of moral law, and of the truth itself. It is inconceivable that all of this can continue without God punishing the world by some terrible chastisement. This is why we must beg God's mercy for ourselves and for all mankind. And we must struggle, we must fight for what we love more than anything else in this world. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are traditional Catholics. And hopefully we can continue to have these conversations to talk about why the whole world needs to the whole Catholic world needs to seriously consider going back and embracing the traditions of our Holy Catholic faith. I'm Michael Matt for the Remnant Underground. Keep and love the old faith, and we'll see you next week.